Before we begin, can I ask one small favor? If you like the show and the conversations we're sharing, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to the show and follow along on whatever platform you're listening to this on. You may not know it, but by simply subscribing, you are helping us in a big way to continue creating and sharing our quiet conversations. Thank you so, so much. Now, onwards to the show.
People have never been more anxious, yet we've never had more solutions for anxiety. The physical symptoms of people pleasing would be a constant pit of anxiety in the stomach, racing heart, sweaty palms. There's no shame in it. It's just the moulding of who we are. One of the reasons that people find it really hard to change and get stuck is because they're trying to change in their conscious mind, whereas the unconscious mind controls 96% around everything that we do. So when we want to change, we need to work with our unconscious mind. I notice this most in the workplace, where there are people please and they find a boss who's completely happy to abuse that. People know often exactly what the problem is. They've tried loads of things. They may have kind of really often quite great awareness, insight into it, but they just don't know how to change it. Can you go out and disappoint 3 people and come back and see me tomorrow? My name is Gemma Perlin and I'm a behavioural change coach, and I work with people one-to-one and in groups. And I help people move forward in their lives in the way that they really want by finding solutions to the problems that hold them back.
This week on The Quiet Life, we're talking about people pleasing, those who do and those who don't. And so I'm speaking to Gemma Perlin, a leading UK behavioural change coach known for her transformative work and impactful workshops. We speak about why people pleasers have a constant need for control and a predictable sense of safety, and how we can break the cycles of abuse that can be formed in some personal and professional relationships. As a coach, she has equipped clients to break free from their limiting patterns of belief and supports them with a powerful toolkit to help equip individuals with the strategies to be able to live life in a way that they really want to. I learned a lot in this conversation. I'm really excited to share it with you today. Now, onwards to the show. Hi, Gemma. Welcome into the podcast. Thank you so much for joining. So your work is in a behavioral change. What is that? Tell me how that works.
Behaviour change is about changing the way we do things so that we can behave differently, act differently, and ultimately live our life in the way that we really, really want.
Where do you think people get stuck most commonly?
People get stuck when the same solutions to the problems don't work anymore, and also they change, but the same approach they have to life hasn't changed as well.
I find that really interesting because I think in everyday life, everyone has an element where they think things are going really well. They also think things aren't working. But I tend to find, and maybe it's just my personal reflection, you have a lot of things you think you can just figure out by yourself, or you think you can just figure out how to make things better, or it will get better. Why is the work that you do really helpful for people? And actually, what's the process in which people find their way towards this kind of support?
Absolutely. I think my work, people know often exactly what the problem is. They've tried loads of things. They may have kind of really often quite great awareness, insight into it, but they just don't know how to change it. They keep doing the same thing, even though, as you mentioned then, like they consciously know they're doing it. And the reason that we kind of ultimately keep getting in our own way is because a lot of behaviour is held in our unconscious mind, and our unconscious mind controls 96% around of everything that we do, but our conscious mind and our unconscious mind rarely know how to communicate with each other. So that's why we get stuck.
How do we differentiate conscious and unconscious? How do we talk about that in a way where I suppose everyone can understand the difference between the two?
So the unconscious mind it does all the stuff that we don't even know that we're consciously thinking about, e.g. opening a door.
Okay.
How you know how to ride a bike, even if you haven't ridden a bike in a long time, your body just remembers how to do it. And that's why we get so confused sometimes when we push a door and it goes the opposite way that we think it's going to go to, because we're not used to it. Sometimes, I don't know if you have this, we're walking somewhere and you have no recollection, you've been there many times, you have no recollection of how you actually got there. You don't remember the journey. We were driving and you kind of like, oh, I'm suddenly here. That's all the behaviour that's held in our unconscious mind. Conscious mind stuff is like consciously thinking about having to do something.
So then where does the relationship between unconscious mind and, say, memory? So if all that stuff is stored in, let's just call that the back of the brain, or in the place of the mind where it's not overtly at the front, are we going into recall to grab it, or is it literally just there and then it brings itself forward when it's needed?
So I would actually describe it, rather than being the back of the mind, I'd describe it as the software of our mind. I describe it as like our iOS.
Yeah.
It's our programming. So it's always there. So right now you and me are having a conversation and we're consciously thinking, but our unconscious mind is listening to everything we're saying, behaving, reacting and experiencing, and it's all going in.
Right. And so what I really like about that, and I find it really interesting, because in this type of conversation, in the kind of work that I suppose all the conversations happen on this podcast, is you have those aspects where there's layers beneath the intellect, or the things that are programmed in or become programmed in, whether we want to call them past memories that lead to perhaps the way we interact with the world, things that create traumas or triggers in our lives. And so we have natural or nurtured patterns that create our identity based on all the things that we've done in our lives. I suppose, what are some of the most common behavior patterns that people have that need to change or require shifting?
I mean, people have never been more anxious, yet we've never had more solutions for anxiety. So I think patterns of anxiety are really interesting, because anxiety all comes from a place of our unconscious mind. When it was really important in the past, trying to protect us, we create some kind of coping mechanism that has some kind of use in that point. But because our brain loves patterns, our mind just keeps on doing it. And it's kind of the same with people pleasing. It's the same with any kind of like perfectionism, any kind of behavior pattern that often kind of gets in our way, the kind of main things that people are like, I need help with this, I need help with that. It's all because we're just running a pattern all the time. So when I work with people, we work at changing the pattern and creating something different instead.
So with people pleasing, obviously that's a big one that now more than ever we see becomes or turns into maybe not a negative pattern, but a pattern that has detrimental effect. I suppose with people pleasing, what is the process of that? How do people become people pleasers? What are the good and bad in that?
So I think it's really interesting with people pleasing, because I think one of the main reasons that people get stuck is they don't actually really define what being a people pleaser is. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you think a people pleaser is, but sometimes people use it as an identity of like, I'm an empath, I'm a good person because I love to please people. Ultimately, being a people pleaser isn't actually about, obviously there's a byproduct of it. Often people do a lot of things for other people, but it's all about control. It's about not feeling safe and needing to control other people's reactions, because in the past, maybe people have reacted in ways that you didn't necessarily anticipate and you didn't feel safe.
That's interesting. So people pleasing is needing to control understanding or feeling safe in people's responses to you.
Yeah, it's like, I don't trust how you're going to react, and that's okay for me. So I'm going to do everything I can to imagine what would please you right now, and that's at the cost of my own needs.
Okay, so give me some examples of this. So work me through it, like a metaphor or an example of a situation.
I mean, I'd love to think of one with you. I think that'd be interesting. Is there do you ever notice a tendency where, like, have you said yes to something you didn't want to say yes to, or?
Yes and no. I tend to, and if I'm honest, I tend to be at the place in my life where I'm very clearly not a people pleaser, because very intentionally I have a relatively good sense of clarity of what works for me and what doesn't.
Okay.
I mean, there's an element of control in all aspects of my life, but I think when you look at things like with children or with partners at home, there's an element of people pleasing to help support. But if I was to self-reflect or try to be self-aware, I wouldn't say I'm a people pleaser, but I'm sure I have people-pleasing qualities.
Yeah.
What types of things would you ask
It's the person, I guess, who never says no to anything. So they always do stuff, and then they, at the cost of they kind of then get burnt out, overwhelmed, or they say yes to a plan, but they don't really mean it. They say yes to going to a hen do in a different country. Then they'll stress, complain, everyone around them, but they've gone. Or someone...
Yeah, that's not me. I'm definitely not going to hen do's and stag do's in other countries if it doesn't work for me. And again...
Yeah,
and
that's a really clear distinction, though. Like, some people find that impossible because they're scared if they say no, then that person's going to be mad at them.
Yeah, and I totally understand that, because obviously a lot of times when I was younger, it was very much like, I'll go to every birthday party and I'll go to everything. Quite naturally, probably because of the work I do and the time I've spent in my own practices, I've found the lines of value for me of what works and what doesn't. So I'm very much someone who's like, it's very unlikely I'm going to go to your birthday with love, because I know that there's going to be 50 people there buying for your time. So actually me coming at that point might be supportive for the appearance of the celebration. But at the same time, it might not strengthen our individual relationship because I know quite honestly, like, you're going to spend 2 minutes there, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes there. And so I won't go in that instance. I mean, not in every instance, but in most instances, because for me, I value a more individual relationship or connection, which I think I can find another time. You know, I have a really good friend who got engaged last year, and it was very much, hey, do you want to come to the stag do? And I'm like, with a lot of love and friendship, no, because I know the stag do very generically and typically is going to be big nights, big events, whatever it is. And for me, you know, I'm not up past 11 o'clock much, don't drink, I don't really go out. So for me, it wasn't going to be an experience that worked for me.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to devalue the invitation. But at the same time, I had the conversation and said, you know what, for me, that doesn't work. And I don't want to take away from your weekend experience, because I know that's a great celebration and a great experience for you in that moment. So let's do something else another time. But I suppose the question, or the root of this, is for someone who doesn't do that, or someone who has that need to please or says yes to everything, what are the things that we can look out for? You know, saying yes to everything is probably a good one.
Yeah, saying yes to everything. I feel like that really summarizes the main thing. But then also there's this whole rumination element. So I really notice when people struggle with this, it's like when they leave a situation, they then ruminate about how they feel that everyone perceived them, going over conversations in their mind. Like, did I say that? Do you think that person said that? Do you think they're okay with me? Kind of like often sort of questioning their friends, like, are we okay? Like worrying, scared if people do something wrong to them that genuinely feels wrong, scared to bring it up because they're worried that the friendship won't hold it. And what I was just hearing a lot from you, Michael, that when you were explaining how you perceive things, is it feels like you feel really safe in your friendships. You feel like okay, and that's what I'm hearing. That I think people who struggle with people pleasing don't always have. Like, you're okay in that moment if you're about not going, whereas it can feel like really fight or flight for people to say no.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting conversation. You can take it at multiple different angles, and I think there's an element of, I suppose, self-awareness and comfort and sense of self, to the point where for me it's about, am I comfortable with myself even before am I comfortable with and safe in my relationships that I keep, so I don't feel at this point in my life I need to do that.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm also okay if that doesn't work for someone else, but it does work for me. I suppose if someone is, you know, feels that they are a people pleaser, I feel like for some people it might even be hard to acknowledge that they are, because it almost could feel like a negative thing these days.
To be a people pleaser.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if someone's listening to this right now and they're hearing things that feel really familiar, firstly, like, I'm not talking about this as an intellectual exercise. This is something that has been a real struggle for me, and I actually don't think I am where you are still in that journey with it. So firstly, there's no shame in it. It's just the molding of who we are. And what is incredible about having awareness, and the modality through which I work with, is awareness is honestly half the battle, because once you're aware, you then have a choice to do something different instead. But if you don't have that awareness, there's no choice.
And it's a really interesting thing you say there, because across all modalities of well-being, or all modalities that support mental health, in most cases, the first underpinned foundation is self-awareness. Like, do you know where you are right now? Without needing to judge it or change it, it's just, do you actually know where you are? Or can you be willing to acknowledge where you are? Because that allows you to essentially just be in the room where something can change. Because otherwise, you're just not even in the room. You're just kind of looking out from a different window and going, oh yeah, there's a room over there that things could change, or things could maybe get better, or things could progress. But if you're not actually in the room or realize there's a room that exists, it becomes a little bit harder in that sense. Do you think someone becomes a people pleaser, or it's an innate quality that you have?
So I believe that people are conditioned, often from childhood, often from way back when. And people pleasing comes from a place, can be with, like, as a child with your parents, where people reacted and you didn't know it was coming, and it was scary. Then that message and then a belief comes that we don't know how people are going to react, so it's actually safer to try and control the situation. So, you know, I didn't know that mum was going to suddenly scream at me. Oh, she's screaming at me now. Okay, so I need to then make sure be hyper vigilant, always about other people's reactions. So it's interesting, people who struggle with people pleasing are not in the room. They're not in their own body in the room. They're in the room, but if I was in that state, I'd be trying to be in your experience right now, trying to perceive everything of how you feel about me. I'm not in my own body with my feet on the floor, with my body in the couch. I'm over there in something else.
And I find that really fascinating. And for me personally, I find it really interesting because obviously the nature of my work is obviously similar to yours, supporting people in different phases where they are. But I don't have that sense of self-awareness of feeling that. And maybe I was very lucky to grow up in a household with safe parents, predictable parents, where I didn't have that level of what's dad going to say, what's mom going to say, does that work? And so my conditioning was to be self-confident, self-aware, which I'm very lucky to have that environment. It's the environment we try to raise our children in and those kind of approaches. But for people who have that feeling of almost like feeling like they are taking on the energy of the room or always trying to look out for the danger in the room or the unpredictability, what are the physical manifestations of that?
The signs I notice of people pleasing are physically worrying anxiety a lot, like pit in the stomach, eyes scanning around a lot, trying to figure things out. Often I notice that people who with this don't often sit with both feet on the floor. They often are kind of suspended. They don't properly sit in their chair. They might often sit at the end of their chair because they're too busy trying to figure out how everyone else is doing. So it's kind of like they're not really fully in their body in the room. And then because of that, the body doesn't feel held. And anxiety, whichever way you experience anxiety going on, and a very busy head. And
do you think those, I suppose, qualities, are there any benefits in that?
I think there are lots of secondary gains, as I would describe it, to people pleasing, which I think is one of the reasons why people get so stuck, because people who are people pleasers are often very liked because they will sacrifice everything to show up for you. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And the thing is, when we're going to start talking about how we change it, but the first thing is, if you overcome people pleasing, you might be less, not I would say popular, but there will be a ripple effect into the way that your relationships are with people because you're not a doormat anymore.
But I suppose that's a really interesting point. Is, do you need to overcome people pleasing, or do we need to better balance how we people please? So I suppose my question is, do we need to work towards not people pleasing? Is that the outcome?
So everything, I'm going to get really pernickety now about the structure of this, because structure is really important when we're creating change. And often the reason we can't create change is we try to not do the thing that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
We don't put in the destination of what we want instead. And our brain loves direction. I put in direction to get here today while we were coming studio, and I was given all these routes to get here. Our brain is exactly the same. So if I was like, I don't want to people please, I'm not giving myself any new information. So actually we need to think about what we want instead of the people pleasing. And I have some ideas about that, but that is the first step. Start thinking about what you want instead.
And what would be common things that we would want instead?
I want to be honest.
What do you mean?
I want to be honest with people. And I guess that I want to be okay with disappointing people, which still feels a little bit away from, but still I want to be okay with disappointing people. I want to be honest in my relationships. And I think it all comes back to honesty with me.
Hi friends, I hope you're enjoying listening to the show. One of the ways that we can keep this pod going in the best possible way is by the help of some of our amazing partners and friends. So if you can give me just a few moments to listen into these ads and messages, it would be so appreciated. Exhale is a choice to take control of your mind and mental health. Welcome to the Just Breathe course for breathwork and meditation, our 6-week program to help you breathe better, reduce stress, and regulate the nervous system. Hi, I'm Michael James Wong, meditation and breathwork teacher and founder of Just Breathe. And my life's work is dedicated to helping as many people as possible quiet the mind using the power of breathwork and meditation. And that's why I created Exhale. This course brings together my 20 years of experience studying, sharing, and teaching these practices in the real world. Inside the course, you'll gain instant on-demand access to over 100 plus videos, lectures, technique tutorials, and guided breathwork and meditation practices dedicated to helping you create a personal and powerful ability to respond to any and all of life's big and small stressful moments. In this course, you'll learn my unique perspective and agnostic approach to help quiet the mind and regulate the nervous system. Each week during the course, you'll be invited to join our live Zoom sessions where I'll share and discuss with you both the science and the wisdom of these quiet practices. And even more, I'll be joined by some of the world's most well-respected psychologists and neuroscientists to help us understand even further. We'll talk about the nuances of stress, the science of stimulation and how we regulate the nervous system, and how to rewire your brain for the better. And what I love most about this course is you're not just joining me, you're joining a community of like-minded people all around the world who are dedicated to learning more, building their personal practice, and understanding how to use breathwork and meditation to change our lives for the better every single day. As a reminder, you'll get on-demand and lifetime access to the course material. You'll have access to 100 plus video lectures, techniques, and practices. And you'll have 6 weeks of live talks and lectures and learnings with me on breathwork and meditation. You'll have 3 amazing talks with some of the world's most well-respected psychologists and neuroscientists, and you'll become part of our global Just Breathe community. So join us on the journey as we take control of our mind and mental health. Welcome to Exhale. The course is now open. See you on the inside.
Okay, so if we take that as an example, and if I'm honest, I feel like it's a big step, right? If you're arguably the people pleaser in your relationship, your friendship group, or just in everyday life with strangers, and you want to shift to being honest, great, but let's call it, what do you say? Like being honest or...
Okay with disappointing people.
Okay with disappointing people. That feels like a big jump for someone who's been conditioned to be the most likable person in the room.
Yeah, you start really small though. So you don't...
what?
So you don't start with you start with tiny little steps. When I first started with this...
You just stop showing up for meetings.
Yeah.
Just stop showing up for
It's all about
parties.
the content, because basically our mind needs to know that it's safe to... I completely agree. Our mind needs to know that it's safe to move forward. So we need to actually create action. So this isn't an intellectual exercise. We actually need to take this out into the real world.
Okay.
So instead of being, don't need to be like show up and start having a showdown with your parents about your childhood, it's about being really honest about when someone says like, how was that for you? Being honest about how your day was, or like, even if, it just really starting to, I think of an example now. My coach, when I first started with this, said, Gemma, can you go out and disappoint 3 people and come back and see me tomorrow?
Ooh, okay. What did you do?
I really struggled.
Or sorry, what went through your brain first, I suppose?
First, sheer like cold panic, even though up in my head I'm like, hey, that's not a big deal, but I felt in my body fear.
And so what did you do?
Oh god, it's really embarrassing. I went to I was training in the southwest of England, and I went to a Costa, and normally it's really important to me that I want the server to really like me, and I want to think that's a really nice person. And I was actually really tired because it was the end of the day. And my way of disappointing them was I didn't ask them how they were. I was quite sullen. I was just quite quiet, and nothing happened, and the world didn't end. And I know that sounds such a ridiculously small thing, but for me, it's about training my mind and my body that it's okay to not do everything for someone who's standing in front of me. I don't need everyone to like me.
And so did you have, I suppose, your own sense of self-pattern where every time you meet a new person, you ask them how their day's going?
Yeah.
Is that a manifestation of people pleasing?
That's also just genuine curiosity. It's about the intention behind it. Was I doing it because I'm interested in how they're doing? No, I was doing it because I want them to like me.
What was the second thing?
The second thing was, I actually failed with the second thing, because the second thing was I was meant to tell someone that I couldn't go to their birthday party, and I couldn't do it. I got too nervous. So I went back and he said, and then the third one was I didn't do everything, so I disappointed my coach.
And then like a month later, you just ended up in like Sweden in the dead of winter at a birthday party.
Exactly. Downing shots in Ibiza. It had to start really small for me, because you're right, it's a big step. Because also that cold panic, that's not Gemma as a 33-year-old. That's Gemma as a child.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that.
that's why this visceral reaction. And they say to people like, could you just go and tell your friend that you actually don't want to make plans with them this weekend, even though you're free? You actually, because that's another thing, people who are people pleasers, they feel like it's not valid to say no to something if they can theoretically do it. I say, can you tell them? And they're like, but why do I have an excuse about why I can't make it? I'm not busy. And I'm like, what if you told someone that you actually just really need the weekend to yourself? And they're like, but what if they think I don't like them? What if they hate me? And it's just such a it's so powerful feeling in the body. And that's old stuff trapped.
Yeah, it's a really funny thing where as adults we continuously reliving patterns of our childhood. At the same time, it shows up as an adult in very obvious everyday lifestyle. I had a teacher once I was a music teacher back when I was in school, and I have this this story for some reason just popped into my mind. He used to say, because he was very much a not people pleaser, and he used to say anytime he would always make these jokes, and obviously we were kids at the time, and he was like, by the way, everyone, I'm probably not coming to your graduation. I'm probably not going to message you back if you message me. And I know I'm your music teacher and we all have a great time in class, but there's no point in inviting me to your birthday party because I'm probably not going to come. Like, that's how he starts. And it was kind of like one of these things you're kind of like, oh, this is harsh. But also it kind of clearly laid out the terms of the relationship.
He's being honest.
And he would always say, no matter what you invite me to, I'm probably going to stay at home and just play my trumpet to myself. And that was, he was a great trumpet player. That was his thing, music. And his whole line of it was, this is where I'm going to be at. And I remember that. It just pops in my brain out because it was clearly defined terms of a relationship that allowed all of us as kids at the time to decide for ourselves the value in the relationship. And I think it's an important thing because I think it is that thing is as we get older, a lot of people don't understand perhaps the value of relationships we keep, the need or value that we need to put in ourselves in our relationships or friendships or whatever it is. And so it goes into that world of what you're talking about, which I really like how you phrase it, of that not feeling safe, not feeling in control, hence the leading towards the fawning or the people pleasing. I suppose what I'm really interested in, especially for people listening, is what are the actions forward that can help move this in a direction for positive change or behavior change? Because as we said a moment ago, you can't just kind of go from I'm a people pleaser to
that you're a music teacher.
I'm going to call everyone and tell them, don't invite me to your party. Because also that can feel, even from a general point of view, you rude, dismissive, segregational. You don't want to become a jerk either.
Yeah.
Right. And where's the fine line of not being a people pleaser, but also not ruining relationships?
And I think that has to be done by exploring, actually taking this stuff out into the world and really finding out what is true. You asked kind of what practical things I'm really sensing are important, and I think they're really important here. The first practical thing I could suggest would be just awareness. So keep a diary at the end of every day. If you journal, doesn't matter if you have a practice or not. Can you just sit and just think about all the things that you may have done today? And the distinction is not things that you did that were nice for other people, but just things that you did that ignored your own needs and were at the cost of your own needs. So that's the first thing. Just keep a diary without judgment, as we say, just noticing. The second thing is when someone asks you something or if there's an opportunity, just take a pause. Take a pause and just ask yourself the question of okay, how's that feeling for me? Because often when we struggle with people pleasing, we actually have no idea what we want. We don't know because we're not used to asking ourselves. Start taking pauses. And then in the third instance, working out what this new reality could look like for you. Figuring out okay, what is it like if I disappoint people? What are some micro steps that I can start to take? Better than Gemma and Costa probably, but start to take some moves out into the world. And then the fourth one I'd recommend is this idea of self-soothing. The noticing that we can feel this panic in the body, which could have stopped us. It can stop us. It feels very real. But working to self-soothe. And I think a really fantastic way to self-soothe is the body. So is it can you physically hug yourself? I know it sounds almost insultingly simple, but really hugging yourself when you feel that panic and letting yourself know that you're actually okay is so powerful.
Really good tips. And I think it is true. And I think it all goes back to, and a lot of these conversations go back to, the simple stuff is the most powerful stuff. But as always, we forget it because we get too stuck in our brains. We get too stuck in a pattern. We get too stuck in a behavior that makes us feel in control and makes us feel safe. I'm going back to the what can we do list, because for me, I find that really fascinating because, those little tasks that you got set out to do, I find are really interesting. And what you're talking about is kind of writing stuff down in a journal. And in my brain, it kind of like, I had a little laugh in my brain because it's, the world these days is very much about a gratitude journal. Write down the things that, you appreciate, write down all the things that you're grateful for, which is a wonderful practice. But in my mind, I'm like, there's this whole other thing. We could have like a disappointment journal or a boundaries journal or a priorities journal or a selfish journal, which puts that reframe to people who feel like they're out of control in situations and needing to please. So I suppose if we were to run a little bit of a example simulation, and if let's just call her Vanessa. Vanessa feels like she's a people pleaser, and she's found her way to come and see you and to work with you on changing those patterns. And obviously, she presents herself as, let's call it, the most stereotypical generic case in this instance. Can't say no to a party invitation, always feels like she's the doormat for her friend group, doesn't really feel a strong sense of self without validation. The things that probably in these kind of behaviors, you're looking for so much external validation to have that sense of safety and control and identity. What would be some of these everyday disappointment tasks that you could offer her, or you'd almost ask her to do?
So firstly, I'd get her to really think about what she would like her life to look like instead, what that would mean, like what's there more of, what's there less of. And then we'd start taking the steps to figure out, okay, what are the things, if you were on a desert island right now, that you would like to be doing, or the things that if you didn't care what people thought, what you would really like to be doing. And, if I've had clients who are like, if I didn't have to do this, I was like, okay, what would you be doing instead? And they're like, well, actually, I think I'd really like to do more pottery. I could just give you an example. Okay, so what's it like if you tell someone that you're not free because you're doing pottery? Or
so do you think it's good to have not an excuse, but like a go-to thing or line?
No, I guess I'm just using that example because often her people pleasers, they don't often pursue the things that they find creatively or like intellectually interesting because they're so busy doing things for other people. But I would say actually you're playing into the people pleasing if you have that excuse, because also a lot of people with people please often end up kind of wrapped in like a lot of white lies sometimes, because often they end up wanting to get out of things a lot as well, because they sign up to things, they burn themselves out, they say yes to everything. So I actually think the honesty is really important. But yeah, I'd be interested to know, like, what does Vanessa want her life to have more of? And how can I support her in that? So it's actually kind of transcends the people pleasing. It's actually just like, what do you want your life to look like? Let's not focus on that so much, but let's move you more towards pleasing yourself.
It reminds me of a quote. So often in life, we forget that no is a full sentence, but yet it's a hard thing for anyone to put a full stop after.
100%.
And it is that thing where, let's call it, almost every single human being in an everyday life, if you invite them to a party, a lot of people will say yes, especially if we're talking about people pleasers. And even the people that say no will always give, let's call it, reason, excuse, validation, distraction, diversion. But there's a really empowering quality to just simply say no, thank you, or no, and that be the whole sentence. But why do you find people think that's so hard to do?
Because I guess how society has conditioned us that we kind of need to be making things okay for people all the time. And it's interesting because, as you just said, the kind of no, then I felt my body relax, because the wonderful thing is when we start kind of changing, we actually give other people permission to show up. And I was really scared when I stopped people pleasing that I would lose like relationships with people. And I'd say in the majority, I actually have much closer relationships with people, because you saying to someone, hey, I actually can't make it because I'm not feeling great at the moment. I just need to stay home and the whole weekend and just like chill. Because they're like, maybe then you will give them permission to be like, hey, that's not great for me at the moment. Or like, it's like there's all this stuff going on beneath the surface, and maybe you're offering someone an opportunity to kind of really be themselves in a way.
Yeah, and that is really important. One of the things that becomes of this when we start to say no more and we really start to get comfortable with what we need, when you get comfortable with saying no, your yes means so much more. Right? Because, and I'm a good example of that. I will genuinely say no to most every dinner party, birthday party, social event, just because of kind of where I am in the stage of my life, what things are important for me. Sleep's really important. Quiet time for myself is really important. Family time is really important. But also, if I say yes, it means I genuinely want to be there, and I'm genuinely going to show up, and I'm genuinely there for a good time. And the person that I'm saying yes to means something to me. And that was something I learned early on, that when you get comfortable with saying no, your yes means so much more.
Absolutely. And I think listening out for the yes as opposed to focusing on the no is also really important, because again, our brain likes direction. So really being curious about what a yes feels like for you. So when you hear that thing that you do really want to say yes to, you probably, it's like a yes. But for a lot of people, and something I'm really learning within myself is like, is this a yes in the body? Is this actually a yes? And finding out what your yes is, I'd say, is actually more important than even working out what a no is.
So I want to ask you about friends or friendship groups, because I think that this is a really interesting piece of the puzzle that can be a struggle. Because if everyone has friends or a circle of friends, that someone is inevitably the people pleaser. It might be you, it might be someone else. But I find typically in friendship dynamics, and let's call this a group of friends, 3, 4, like the friends you grew up with, for example, or the friends you have in your office or at work, inevitably someone in there is the people pleaser. If that's you, how do you shift or change that without losing friends or changing dynamics or it becoming detrimental to the relationships?
Well, I'd ask that person, do you really want to be the kind of the lose friends piece? Do you really want to be friends with someone who's cool with you not being you and who'd rather you sacrifice yourself to make them happy?
But in that environment, potentially, your friends only know you as you, the people pleaser.
Yeah, so it could be quite an interesting thing. I often think when you're trying something new, to lighten it a little bit, you can tell people what you're doing. What's it like to tell your friends, guys, you all know that I, always do this and this and this. I'm actually trying to I noticed that the cost of this is, explain what the cost of it is. I'm trying to be a little bit more honest about myself. I'm on this journey at the moment with it, and kind of take it out and put it on the table.
Have you had any experience with that with people you work with, or how did that roll out, or how did that fall out?
I have never found that when people are honest, that ultimately in the long term, that is ever not useful. And I think ultimately we want to be surrounded by people who are really okay with us. And I think things come into really clear focus when we are honest. So yeah, I've always found that that's been a really useful thing for people. And the idea of it is almost so much worse than the reality of just being hey guys, it doesn't need to be super serious. It can just be quite light. I'm trying to do this thing.
I suppose though, let's call it friendship dynamics, what's the opposite of a people pleaser? What is the opposite of a people pleaser? So if there is a people pleaser, is there a people thank youer, or the person receiving all the pleasing?
It's interesting. I wonder what the I guess it's someone who's as in the negative, or
I suppose in that friendship group, say there's 3 or 4 friends and someone's the people pleaser, Vanessa's the people pleaser. Is Bob over here the one always asking Vanessa to do stuff because he knows that Vanessa's going to do stuff? And so what role does Bob have, or what name does Bob have? What is Bob in the relationship with Vanessa?
I noticed this actually, I definitely exist in friendships, but I noticed this most in the workplace. I have clients who've always found themselves in situations where they're a people pleaser, and they find a boss who's completely happy to abuse that. And I kind of say to them, it's not an accident that you've had like 3 jobs where the same thing has happened. If you're a people pleaser, people who are okay with abusing that in some way will always find you. So unless we break this cycle, great that you're leaving this company, but you're going to go and find another job where that is the same reality.
Yeah, I suppose there's power dynamics there as well at play.
Yeah.
Quite naturally. You've got power dynamics, you've got financial motivations, you've got hierarchy. I suppose in a friendship group where you would hope that there is an equality that's out on the table.
Yeah.
I find those people who are the people who take advantage of the people pleaser, I suppose there is that resistance if there's that shift or change of putting it out on the table saying, you know what, I'm really working on this thing to build a boundary, being a bit more honest. I suppose, do you find that the person who takes advantage pulls away and finds someone else or goes with that and evolves?
Maybe they didn't know, though. I think it's interesting. I always think kind of like, always coming from the place of like, people are just doing the best with what they've got. I'm not convinced that people who are benefiting of people pleasers actually really know that they're doing it at the sacrifice of their own needs, because people pleasers are pretty good at hiding that in a way. So I would give people the benefit of the doubt that like in a friendship group, which is obviously based on equality, it's always a choice. It's not like a boss-employee relationship. That maybe they just didn't know because you're not telling them. We can never know what's going on in someone else's reality. So I'd really come from that place of like, they don't know, but maybe I can let them know.
Yeah, and I think that's really important as well, because I suppose what underpins really good relationships, any relationships, is not just clear and honest communication, but maybe the reality check that I don't actually know what's going on in your brain. I can't actually read your mind.
People pleasers think they can, though.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because even in the closest friendships or relationships, you know, there's a part of the self that wants to feel safe enough that someone else kind of knows what they're thinking intimately at all times. You know, I feel like this, so that's why you should do this, and I feel like this, that's why you should say this. But I do understand what you're saying, where people pleasers feel like they can, or they pick up on the energy, or what you were saying at the very beginning, like the hypersensitivity. Is hypersensitivity and people pleasing one and the same?
Yeah, I'd say it's this hypervigilance, and also because the more you do something, the better you get at it, and you can. There is, you know, that's what I'm saying. It is useful in some ways. People who are people pleasers, like maybe are quite good at picking up energy, but it's then what they do with it. Then they then try and control it. And one of the most freeing things I've really ever discovered, Michael, is when I realized that like I will never know what's going on for another human being, and just noticing that I don't know that and I can't control that was just like the most. I was like, okay, cool, so I can just stop trying.
I'll tell you a funny anecdote, and I suppose it's really interesting around this idea of people pleasing. And you know this, like a lot of my work is meditation, breath work, mindful practices. So by nature, I breathe a lot, right? On purpose. I self-regulate. I do a lot of, I suppose, self-regulatory techniques to make sure I'm managing myself through stress, which shows up as things like me just doing random exhales at random times, which might seem odd in a room, right? If I'm in a coffee shop or on a sofa, I might just be like, right? And again, for me, that's really normal. And usually with strangers, every now and then someone will be like, are you okay? Is everything okay? And it's only been more recently where I've really started to notice it happens more frequently. And maybe it's because I'm more comfortable doing it in anywhere, like on the train. But at the same time, I've started to notice how many people really, almost in many ways, have scanned me and then asked if everything's okay. And obviously for me, usually I make a little bit of a joke like, oh, I just have extra air in my mouth, like, or I've just kind of just taken a breath out to just, you know, do a bit of practice. And then obviously it turns into a nice chat. But it is really interesting how many people say something. Do you feel that, I suppose, this idea of hypervigilance is on the rise or innately tied to the level of anxiety and stress that is elevating in society?
I'm just imagining, I think it's because we live in a world now where people are so much more like on their phones and like in here. and we're less in our body. So you were doing something which challenges that because you're literally there in your body. So for people who are, everyone's like, let's not communicate, let's be quiet, let's make myself smaller, let's get even more into my phone, let's get my head in here. You're doing something that challenges that. And I think we're less open and we're less free. So anything out of the ordinary of the like tech neck situation feels weirder to people.
It's a relevant need to get back into our bodies. And I think it is really important. So I think for me, what's interesting in this conversation, this idea of people pleasing, the need for people to kind of, retain or regain that sense of control and feeling safe. But I find that the everyday actions are easy to talk about, harder to put into practice, even though a lot of times they're simple. So let's do this. Let's give me 3 things that you think anyone listening could actually start to do. And we'll go back to that first when you said of write a journal, write stuff down. What are 2 other ones? Let's put it on let's call it Gemma's disappointment list.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, firstly, become really aware. And the really important thing with the awareness is you don't do it in like a naughty me. You kind of have this lightness of like, oh, look, I'm doing that thing. Like, oh, I did it today, but it's really important, your relationship with yourself doing it, because ultimately you're not trying to do this on purpose. So that's the first thing. And
should they do something when they are aware, like write it down, keep score, say something, or is it just literally, I did the thing again?
I want you to write down what you did and what it was the cost of. I just think it's just keep it really simple, put it on your notes, or like do it when you notice it, or do it at the end of the day. And then it's introducing this idea of like, yeah, Gemma's disappointment, like go out and disappoint some people, but start really small. Please start small. Be really gentle with it. And then the third is, as I mentioned before, it's like taking that pause, developing, and that comes before the disappointment, like really developing like what are your needs? Because it was interesting at the beginning of this conversation, Michael, we were talking about why this is not something that you struggle with. And it's because you maybe have tendencies, but you wouldn't define yourself as a people pleaser. It's because you told me several times, like, I know what my needs are at the moment. I'm really connected to my needs. And I think people becoming really clear with like their priorities, what's important to them, developing that voice to what that yes is. So maybe sitting down and being like, what am I most focused on at the moment? What's really important to me in my life? Because often if we're so on this train of people pleasing, we kind of aren't that intentional with where we're going. That's one of the big costs of it, I would say.
Gemma, thank you so much for this conversation. I always find anytime that I sit down with different people to talk about different topics, that there's always really fascinating insights that come out of it. And this whole conversation on people pleasing is really interesting for me. And I know a lot of people listening will find it interesting because of how obvious it is, how prevalent it is, whether it's you find these qualities in yourself or in the people in your lives. And I think what's really important is almost that awareness of whether your qualities exist in you, and using some of the insights you shared to be really helpful to move in a forward direction for shifting behavior, but also those people who take advantage of or not even realize or just recognize that the dynamics are almost feeding into the people pleasing. And I think with relationships that we have, especially the ones that are meaningful, the ones we care about, the ones that are close, that I think there is a responsibility on everyone's behalf to ensure that they're balanced, supportive, and everyone is able to, in many ways, kind of be the best versions of themselves in relationships to other.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much for having me.